coach a lot of up-and-coming leaders, next-gen CEOs. And one of the questions that always comes up at some point is there a silver bullet? And most coaches would say no, but I actually think there is. And I think that silver bullet has to do with having exceptional self-awareness and a very clear purpose. Now, those two things are really hard. They take a long time to really get. But if you start now, if you start immediately, you can really develop that sense of awareness. And what I mean by that is your strengths, the real strengths you have, not the ones you think you have, but the ones that you have that data tells you have, and how you use them, how you recognize them, and most importantly, how they impact others. That's the type of self-awareness I'm talking about. Purpose. So purpose is a hard one too, but it's a little bit different because it's a little more introspective. So thinking about, and I would encourage you to do this, thinking about those times in your life, all the way back, when you felt the most joy in your achievement, when you were doing something that you couldn't stop yourself from doing. And if you think about that, when you were 10, when you were 20, when you were 25, what was that? Because that's what's going to inform your purpose. Now, when I wrote the book, I came up with this other way of doing this. I asked every leader in the book, what is the one thing you must have? What is besides integrity, what's the one behavior or trait you think every leader must have in order to be great? And I got a lot of answers. In fact, this is where things really went off the rails, because up until that point, we talked about values and everybody was sort of on the same page. And we talked about the biggest derailer, which most everyone said was arrogance. But here, out of the 20 people I talked to, I got 18 different answers, which tells me that there's as many ways to lead as there are leaders. And so who did I talk to? Kevin mentioned, I talked to Brad Tilden, CEO of Alaska Airlines. He said passion. I talked to Dan Price, Gravity. He said love. Who else? Sunny Gupta from Aptio said transparency. And then I started going outside the book. And every time I write about a leader in the Business Journal or I have them on one of my panels, I ask them the same question. So some of the other answers I've heard, Porch, are there people from Porch here? One? Okay, one's better than none. So Matt Ehrlichman said perseverance, CEO of Porch. King 5, who actually is in the book, Ray Hecox, said humility. Limeade, I know there's some Limeade people here. Henry Albrecht said passion. That was one that was repeated. Passion is the one that I do hear repeated, but very rarely. Greg Rankich from Extreme said vision. And anyway, the list goes on and on. David Niu, can't forget the TINYpulse CEO, said continuous learning. So you can see it's just a broad spectrum of how people think and how they approach their own leadership. So I thought I'd tell you my one must have, but I'm going to do it in the story. So when I think about my own leadership, I think about the two sides, innate and learned. And this was a question I asked every leader. And so it made me reflect on my own. And what I realized was the innate part of my leadership dates back to November 9th, 1938. And I talk about the survivor archetype. The survivor archetypes are a way of categorizing. I'm not going to get all pop psychology here, but categorizing who you are at your very essence. And so November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, it's now known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And this was a night when the Nazis organized coups against the Jews. That's hard to say, coups against the Jews. And all through Austria, all through Germany. And thousands of synagogues were burned, schools were burned, homes were burned, 100 people died that night. And the next day, 30,000 men were rounded up and deported or taken to the train station. And that started the systematic deportation to concentration camps and ultimately to death camps. It was the start of the Holocaust. So my dad was 17 years old on that day, 1938. My dad, not my grandfather, my dad. And he lived in Breslau, Germany. And he had a new job. He's 17 years old, so he's really excited. Gets on his bike super early in the morning. Parents aren't even up yet. And he starts riding to work. And, as he's riding closer to the city, he sees what looks like snow. It's just white and it's glistening because the sun's hitting it. And he's kind of like, there's no snow back here, but, whatever, he's 17. So still riding and starts to look around and realizes that the shops on either side of the street, all the glass was broken out, all the stores had been looted. And there's a whole lot more going on than what he realized. So he started to pick up the pace, realized that what he thought was snow was actually shattered glass on the ground. So he gets to work. He was a safe opener. He was an apprentice to become a safe opener. He gets to work. He gets his assignment. He and his partner, they walk down the road. And the type of safes they open, these are what Dick Cheney might say, man-sized safes, right? Industrial-sized safes that sit at the bottom of a building, of a bank or an insurance company, right? So they get there, they go down to the basement, they see this huge safe, they know it's going to be a long day, they put on their coveralls, their shields, and they fire up their torches and get to work. So a couple hours go by, not a lot of progress, but that's how it goes when you're opening safes. And at some point, my dad feels something sharp on the back of his neck. And so he, fires down his torch, lifts up his mask, turns around, to see two enormous SS officers standing there. So the two men, one's holding the gun that was pointed to the back of my dad's neck. The two men bring the two boys up the stairs and they take them down to the police station. And at the police station, there's a flatbed truck waiting and there's lots of men already on this truck. My dad's loaded up as well. So what he remembered vividly is how slow the driver drove through the town. And it was almost as if people were lined up on the sides of the road like a parade. And they were throwing, bottles and branches and rocks and rotten fruit, whatever they could find at these men, including my dad. And so they eventually get to the train station. And there they join thousands of men. Some are visibly crying, some have suitcases. It's just absolute chaos. And my dad knows this is not going to end well. But everybody's made to line up side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And as my dad's standing there along with all the other men, he sees a Nazi officer standing, pretty close by. Close enough so that if he wanted to, he could probably reach out and touch him. So he did. He stepped forward and he approached the Nazi officer. And as he did, he heard the click of the machine guns, but he kept going. He went up to the officer and he said, "I don't think I belong here. I want to go home." And the officer's like, "Who are you? What's your name? And where's your father? And are you Jewish? And why are you so dirty?" And my dad said, "My name is Teri Citterman. I don't know where my dad is. He was home when I left. I am Jewish and I want to go home." And so more conversation ensued. And eventually the officer pulled over a sergeant, Sergeant Opes, who was about 5 years older than my dad, 22. And Sergeant Opes took my dad by the arm, led him away from the group, down a corridor into a room. And my dad's like, who knows what's going to happen next, right? So he put my dad behind a door. And then he went over to a desk and he rustled around some papers, found whatever he was looking for, and left. So my dad's standing here behind the door with his heart just beating, right? I mean, afraid that anybody walking by could hear his heart beating and he would probably be shot on the spot. So 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes, an hour. And eventually Sergeant Opes came back. And he had the piece of paper and he showed it to my dad. It was a release form and it was signed. He took my dad out from behind the door, led him to the gate, opened the gate, let him out, gave him bus fare, and off my dad went. So back up with me a few steps. What was that thing, that whatever that was inside my dad that caused him to step forward, probably unconsciously, probably naively, but nonetheless, he stepped forward. Tenacity, perseverance, whatever it was, that's what I mean when I talk about the survivor archetype. And so when I think of my one must have, what I think every leader must have in order to be great, it is courage. And if you were to ask me my purpose, I would tell you it is to help good thinkers become great leaders. It's what I do every day, and I love it. So now I'm going to turn it around on you and ask you, what is the one thing, the one behavior or trait that you think every leader must have in order to be great?